Hello everyone. In this video, I'm going to talk about components of automation testing framework. Mostly, I will focus on Selenium with Java. And I have prepared quite a few slides here, and so I can drive you through what are the core skills you need to know. And if you're going for any job interviews, you're preparing for the job interviews, or you're looking to learn something in automation, you want to start your career in the automation testing, or you want to just brush up your skills, or you don't know where to start from, right? And what are the core skills you need to know? Or if you are preparing for your resume, right, what are the skills you need to put in your resume? So this video is going to kind of guide you through what areas you need to focus, and so we'll go through that. First of all, why automation testing, right? What tools and language you need to know, you need to select. So that is the very first thing. Before even going through, right, you have application on automation, right? Automate what you can't automate. So you need to understand what application you are trying to work on, right? So you may get interviews like, is there any areas that you cannot automate, and how you do it? How do you handle it? So there are obviously, right, there are some areas that you may not be able to automate. So you have to obviously do the manual testing, right? There are so many interfacing applications, that different applications you may not have exposed of. Sometimes you might have to do the automation testings. In that case, you have to understand the manual testing. And not always, like I'm going to mostly focus on Selenium. That's why Selenium is mostly the browser related automation testing. So if your application resides in the window-based applications, then obviously Selenium is not the right tool for that you need to choose, right? There are other applications, however, that does integrate with the Windows-based applications, so that you may need to consider. So don't get confused. When you get into interviews, don't mention that Selenium is going to help you to automate the Windows-based applications. So next consideration is open source, right? Is your company willing to pay for the licenses in order to use the automation tools, or it's a free? Selenium is a free, and all of the libraries that Selenium provides are free. Even the IDE tools are also, where you write the codes, are also free, right? So those are kind of some considerations. And obviously the applications can be robust, right, in the Selenium, because it supports all like various languages, right? Java, C#, and all that. And next thing is available libraries, right, that I just mentioned. So what libraries you are going to use, they should be available. Like libraries are basically the source of the codes that's already written for you. You can just use them. You don't have to write it. So in Java, there are like thousands and thousands of millions of codes that's already there for you. You just use them as a library. So you don't have to rewrite them, right? So that is another things. Obviously, the IDE tools. There are various IDE tools that you have in the market. One of the most popular is Eclipse. Eclipse and IntelliJ, and those are kind of pretty popular ones. Those are free also. You could get Community Edition for free on IntelliJ. DB tools, right? What application, the application you're going to work, what database they have. Do they have Oracle or SQL or some NoSQL database or something? So you need to know about that, right? So what tools you're going to use, does that support those DB tools? So that is also very important, because you might have to do some data validations. There are some test management tools, right? There are some Zeta, ALM, all that. You don't really have to integrate your automation testing along with those test management tools. However, you need to know how to work with those management tools, because if you are in Agile, you will be having some tasks associated with your work, right? So you might have to write the task. The one, like, task is basically what you are working on. You are, you are putting those work efforts that your team has a visibility. Otherwise, you may be working on silo on your own and nobody knows what you're doing. So your work hours need to be accounted, and that is the main purpose you have a agile, like all these management tools, so that they can track your work, right? So those are one thing. Obviously, test management tools has various features like having the requirement on its own, traceability metrics, and all that. Totally different world there. So next thing is you need to understand which how do you execute your test, right? There are various ways. We're going to go deeper into that next slide. So obviously you have a test results reports. How do you handle those test results? Like, you run the test, if it passes or fails, how your business or stakeholders or your team knows that test passed or failed. You need to have some mindset of preparing the reports. Data maintenance, so that is basically before you even run your test, you need to make sure the test is runnable. So for example, you are logging into some banking applications, and then that applications should have like some mechanism that will have already a balance there, right? If it, and let's say you have a scenario to pay the bill, right, and then there are no balance, then you should be able to prepare the data that puts some balance in your account, in your test account. This is not the real customer account. This is some testing site account, which doesn't have direct impact to any funding. So that is one of the example. Or you could have some login. You just want to log into the application, but that user doesn't exist, or you might have to reset all the passwords or all that. You could have come up with the various scenarios depending on what application you're working on. You might be working on airlines, and in airlines, the main target is to give you a best fares. To do the best fare, you need to have some data that actually does a query and find the best rate for you, right? So these things has to be set up before your test actually executes. And how easy it is, what is the, how do you maintain them? So these are kind of questions you may run into. Next thing is obviously that is very important, right? Knowledge, proficiency, learning curve. Is there any learning curve you have? How interested you are into learning into new technologies if you're not familiar with what you're going to work on. And how much do you already know, right? These are the things that you really need to understand. So this is just in a general idea about, it's not specific to Selenium or anything, but overall automation, right? Automation has this kind of high level items that you have to cover. So we're going to go to the next slide. So this is much deeper. So when we say languages, right, there are various languages that Selenium supports: so Java, C Sharp, Ruby, Python, PHP. You got some IDE tools, Eclipse, IntelliJ, STS. STS is basically Spring Source tool suite. So this is just this will work as a background with Eclipse, and this has additional features that support some Spring Boot and Spring libraries. So that's why this has some additional benefits. And other than that, it works exactly same as Eclipse. So versioning tools. So you need to understand, like a Git, SVN, TFS, for so these are one of the sorts you need to know at least, because you are working on coding, right? You have to push your code into the repository. In order to do that, these are the tools that will help you how to push into your repository, right? And then get the version. Let's say you have work with different team members, everybody's working on the same project, then obviously I'm making some changes and I have to coordinate with you, right? And I may be somewhere. So these are the tools that will help to coordinate with everybody and maintain the everybody's code, sync these codes so they don't conflict with each other, fix them, and all that, right? So another thing is execute the test, right? How do you execute your test? Jenkins local. If you have if you're working on small project, you may not even need to go through CI/CD, right? But there are various ways to run tests in the Jenkins. Even if your company has very minor set, you could actually get the Jenkins just installed locally in your machine, and you could just run it through as an application. Or you could have your corporate level Jenkins CI/CD pipeline where you could actually trigger your test. Jenkins will pull the code base from one of these repository, and then based on those repository it will read the code, and it based on the commands what you provide to execute, Jenkins will trigger the test. So at that point it is same as it would run into your local machine, right? Only different in the local machine is when it runs in the local, you cannot use any your mouse, or you have to leave your computer alone, right? If you run it in a Jenkins, you can do your own work, and that's the good thing. Another thing is there are so many additional benefits of running things in the Jenkins. They have so beautiful plugins that will integrate with your automation testing. For example, if you have a test with the Cucumber framework, Jenkins has its own plugin that will prepare the testing results for you. You don't have to write anything. There are other tools, right? There are like a grid. The grid is basically the Selenium grid, which basically runs into the various nodes. Nodes are nothing but virtual machines, which is same as the computer, and it could spread across different tests as a parallel testing and all that. Or you could even run into Sauce Labs or some cloud providers. So Sauce Labs is basically Sauce Lab will provide you infrastructures for running the test. They are not going to provide you the computer itself, but they are going to provide you the mechanism that will give you the browsers that you want, whatever versions you want, whatever browser you want, and then based on what version you choose, it is going to automatically prepare a browser for you to run your test onto their browsers. For that, obviously Sauce is not free, so your company has to pay for it. It's a license, right? It's not just license, but you have to subscribe them, pay monthly or whatever based on usage. So it's going to be costly, but it is going to relieve you from having to think about executing test. So they'll take care of those. There are other areas, like you could actually allocate some VM machines if it is going to be the thing that your company may be able to afford it, and they may be allocate some like 6-7 VMs to run your regression suites, and which could be enough. And then for running VM you need to set up those grids, and so that those grids could actually invoke those VMs. Next thing is DB validation. How do you perform the database validations? If your application has a data that is written in SQL, then you might have to think about how your automation test can connect to those SQL database, run the query, right? And then pull the data. Based on that data that is read from the database, you have to validate it. Or if you have a NoSQL database, there are various NoSQL database, right? Like MongoDB or Gemfire or so many tools. Those you might have to think of. How do you connect to them? Data maintenance. This is pretty much like maintaining the data, which is like you are running your test with the various suites, data sets of the tests, and then you need to find a way. How is it going to be easier for you to maintain those data? Let's say you wanna prepare like 5 different sets of the data, like happy path, negative path, and all that, right? All various scenarios. that scenarios is based on data you provide, right? So for example, you might have a data that is logging in as an admin user credential, that when it logs in with that data, it is going to, take you to admin screen, right? If it was your customer's user ID, then it would take it as a customer's view. So obviously your scenario is going to differ based on data you provide. So you need to find a way how you maintain those data. Based on different set of data, your tests, this data could grow, right, as biggest. So you need to organize them properly so it's easily maintainable. Some extras to have, right, like a browser supports your test, should be supporting Chrome, IE, Edge, Safari. These are kind of common browsers, right? Lots of customers are now using Apple-based computer or iPhones or Edge as a browser. In the desktop, you got IE. Some companies still uses older versions. So your test should be supporting all various form of browsers support. So you don't know, your test could be passing in Chrome and could be, not correctly displaying in Edge, because they are different browsers. You have to support them. Running parallel execution. Parallel could be in the two different ways. You could trigger same test in multiple browsers, or you could just run everything in the Chrome or one single browser, but then run in the different, different nodes. So the framework is basically, you could have a Cucumber-based framework or JUnit or TestNG. There are some examples, right? So JUnit and TestNG are pretty much the similar, but the way Cucumber works is a little bit different. It is mostly BDD, where it's mostly like a business driven. Business would be able to understand. It's mostly like English sentence. You could just write it in, and then as readable. It's mostly readable. When the report comes, the Cucumber, and there are obviously, I just mentioned, Cucumber has a benefit over running in Jenkins using their plugins, and you don't have to write any reporting tool at all. So finally is a code quality and review. So obviously your company may have a various tools to review the code, right? You might have 5 different people writing code. If you do not have a mechanism to review what somebody's trying to push the code, then it could create problems, right? The bad code could come in, or you might even get a compile errors or so and so. So you need to have some set of rules in your team to follow this code review mechanism. So that is very important. So next thing is page object design pattern, right? So basically page object is pretty popular, that you might have like 10 different pages. You don't want to write all element locators into one single classes. If you define them in such a way that each page maintains only that page's specific locators, and then it will be easier for you to maintain them. Maintenance in the sense that tomorrow your company may change those elements, then you just go to change it in one single place. You don't have to write the whole thing. And obviously it is organized. It is obviously going to be clean, readable, and any new member comes into your company and they can easily get it. So next is language proficiency. For Selenium, what you need to know, again, I am going to focus on Java. So obviously you need to know the Java if you are having Selenium based on Java. So how much of the Java do you need, right? So it is kind of a vague question. So you need to know the basic fundamentals of Java. Core Java could contain all core part could be like right. Java is basically object-oriented programming. You need to know what is like a polymorphism, how to overload, override, and inheritance, right? Abstraction, all that. And then you need to know how do interfaces work, how enums work, what are the threading, how do they work, how do you handle the exception handling, what happens when your test fails, how do you validate them, and then obviously you need to know the collections. That is very important. You need to know switch cases, evals, all that, conditions, and the newer part, those are kind of, they came from like version 5, but now we have about 11. I believe there is, newest editions, but 11 is considered mostly stable. So now you may need to think a little more than just the core Java. You need to know the streaming. How do you write code with using the stream API, which is the latest, which it started from Java 8. Lambda is another like a beautiful code that does pretty lightweight and pretty faster when you have to loop through various collections data. So those you need to understand. Obviously Java works along with the Selenium, so there's no such a difference other than you are just using additional Selenium related libraries. So that's the main reason when you go to interviews you get so many Java questions, because if you know Java for Selenium, you are just using their libraries. So Selenium, what is Selenium, right? Selenium is basically you're trying to automate the browsers, which is you are integrating with interacting with how user is using your applications, web browser application. So that means you're clicking, you're typing in, you upload, you download file, and then you send, submit the form, or all that sort of things. That is all about the Selenium. That's only it does. Next thing is a TestNG or JUnit. You may choose one or the another. I mean, for interview purpose, they both are pretty much the same, although TestNG has different ways of making a suite than the JUnit. So JUnit has a 4, but now JUnit 5 has been in the market, so you might want to do a little bit study on that. JUnit 5 is very important, and it has very cool features that may be very helpful to learn. So next thing is Gherkins and Cucumber. Gherkins is basically just a language that for the Cucumber framework that you write given one and then kind of statements. So these Cucumber are nothing but just the scenarios that are tied to Java coding behind as a steps. So whatever action you are doing as a manual testing, those are tied to the Java code into the Cucumber form. That's the only thing. And Cucumber also has a library that is supported by the Selenium tests. So that is the main reason. Cucumber is just going to bring you the beautiful, readable, and and friendly test scenarios that anybody can read and bring the beautiful report. SQL queries is also the main thing that you need to know. The SQL query, when you go to interviews, they're going to ask you questions about various, like how do you how can you write the query that can bring you like top 10 or bottom 10 or all those sort of things, right? So you might want to go through some studies on SQL queries. There are various blogs available. You can even get free download for SQL Studio from Microsoft, and which is just totally free, and you could just use it to get your hands on. CI/CD is again, you can get Jenkins installed in your local computer, and I have another video to how to configure Jenkins installed and run the test. But before even going to CI/CD, you need to have code ready, right? To have a code ready, that code has to be integrated with some Git repository. So there are various steps you have to follow, but you can, once you have the code ready, you can just download the Jenkins and configure. I have a video for that, and you can run the test in the Jenkins. So having that into your local machine gives you lots of ideas that you could encounter in your interviews. Additional benefits to have. So obviously these days the cloud is being very popular. A lot of people talking about it. Even though you are doing Selenium testing, we may still encounter some questions on like how much familiar you are with the cloud concepts. Do you even know the concepts? It's not mandatory that you need to know, but if somebody knows it, then obviously they are given more priority over you. So it is best to have some fundamental knowledge, even though if you don't have knowledge at all. So it's good to study. And if you want to go a little more on that, there are various editions of AWS certifications. If you want to go, there are some practitioner versions, which is like a beginner. You can get those certifications, which will obviously be highlighted for you if you want to do that. There are some associate level. If you want to go a step further, there are associate level of certifications also in the various category. So these certifications will be very valuable these days. So you might want to at least study and have some fundamentals on these cloud concepts. So what's next? So these are mostly Selenium components. In Selenium, mostly focus on browser automation. To automate the browser, you need to have Selenium as one of the tools available, which is a free. It supports various languages. Java is one of the most popular language that it supports, along with their C#, PHP, Python, all Ruby. With the Selenium involved, there's a JUnit, TestNG, or Cucumber framework you could use. But overall, you need to know all of these because when you get into interview, you might get a mix of questions from all of this. Obviously, they're going to ask you questions on SQL, CI/CD. It's not that mandatory that you need to know, but knowing this doesn't take you any more than 2 hours, but that 2 hours is going to be very helpful for you to crack interviews. So I'm going to go a little bit on the web services REST API testing, right? This is very important. If you are going for any automation job or looking for a job, then you just know the Selenium. Let's say you are expert in Selenium, they are still expecting you to know some fundamentals of API testings. What are the API testing? Why, and all this. So I'm going to cover a little bit about this. So there are some common things. You might see some duplicates here, but they are tied to each other. What do you need to know for the REST API testing? So first thing is there are two different sets of the API testing, which is called web services, right? What is the API? Let's say you are using, doing something in your browser, whatever action you do. Let's say you click some button, link, and that button will take you to the different page with a different set of the data that you see. So that is behind the scene coming from the API request. So your button in the UI is internally sends the HTTP call to the server, and server will go to database, get the data for you, and then display it into the next page. So that process is one of the example of API. So as a tester, you need to know how you could directly call that API without having to launch the browser, and then do your all setup testings and validate what response you should expect when you send the request. So you have to know how to send the request, how to get the response, right? And how to read the response. So to sending and getting request response, you have two sets of APIs, right? One is SOAP UI, which is in the XML format only. And if you have a browser web, which is HTTP request, they are REST assured API, right? No, they are REST HTTP based REST API. So what do you need to know for this API now? for you to do this, you have to know Java, right? Because again, we're focusing on Java-based frameworks, so I'm considering Java, but obviously there are various languages you want to work with, whatever is familiar choice for yours, right? So at least you need to know one of the core language, programming language, that can be tied with this API testing. Understand how to send the API. First thing is, before you even automate it, you need to know how to you even manually do it, right? There are various tools you could actually send the request over the browser, like Postman is one of the best example. There are various online tools, they are free. You could download it, or you could just do it online, send the request. It will, you need to understand what it needs to send. So you might have to, based on your application, your type of the endpoint, the services, you need to you might have to send some authorization code as a header, and so there are various sections. You will have a header, request body, right, and then endpoint URL, right, and then sending type, which is called HTTP method. So you need to understand that fundamental at least, and then you should be able to send the request first, like what components you need, what do you need as a header, what do you need as a request body, what do you need to send as a URL, and what type of sending it is, post, delete, right, put, or get, all this. You need to know that. And then when you send it correctly, are you getting the response, and what are you getting in the response? You should read it. So first doing it, that is manually, is the key. And once you know how to do it, there are REST Assured API. This is one of the popular library that you could use this library and then make that manual process automated. I have a videos for that, how to do it with the REST API, and I'm going to upload more videos on this. So having that automated is another key, fundamental key. So obviously you need to know how to send the request. If you're using JSON, HTTP request, that has to be in the JSON format only. So to do that, you have to understand how JSON structure is, how to write the data in JSON, how to prepare it. I have a video for that also. If you're using SOAP UI, it will only work with XML, and XML doesn't work with the HTTP request. So if it's SOAP UI, you have to know how to prepare the WSDL file, and you know how to send the request, that file, XML file. Now, once you get the response, let's say you automated that, you need to obviously validate them. To validate, then comes this one of these core languages that will have to read it. You have to get it. If it is a REST API, you'll get it as a JSON format, and then you have to parse it to fetch the data, overall data, and read specific lines of value. You might have to do those validations. So they might have questions on that. So after that, this even the REST API can run into JUnit, JustNG. It can run. It can be, you could still write the scenarios based on Cucumber. So this no difference. They are, like I said, they are duplicate, but they work together. The only thing this is different than your Selenium test is that it doesn't launch the browser, but the logic behind the scene can work either way. So these will be same. You would still be able to validate the database with the SQL queries. There's CI/CD. You could run this into CI/CD, run in through the Jenkins, and all that, right? So if I know there are so many informations, but these are the core areas that you need to prepare yourself before you go into the interviews, right? And there are some additional behavior what you need to know. It's not just about the coding. If you're going for your jobs, right, they may be asking you, how do you feel about, what type of team you're preferring to work, like, they may talk about the cultures and all that, right? You have to be a team player. You need to be able to work as a team, be friendly and all that type of stuff. You need to also know the business knowledge, right? They might ask you, okay, can you tell me what is the, what kind of scenario you worked on, right? What, project you work on. Can you explain a little bit about this? So you might have to explain, like, how, what type of role you worked on, right? Like that. You need to know how to estimate the testing. So you are working on agile or waterfall, whatever. You should be able to provide the LOE level of estimate, and then also story sizing. Story sizing is basically the story pointing. So when you have the story groomed, and you should be able to size after you understand the requirement, like how long will it take. Based on that, there are various ways to estimate it. Like, you could have a t-shirt size, which is like a medium, large, and small, or you could have user story, like, there could be 1, 2, 5, 3, 5, 8, like that, right? Fibonacci series. So you should be able to know the requirement, asking questions back and forth, all that things, and they might ask you questions related to that. So you need to study some about the agile methodologies, like how to perform estimates, requirements, and all that. You need to know how the agile, scrum, or Kanban process works, right? Even though one of these it could be enough, but when you know both, it's extra to have. Not everybody will be part of the production support, but if you know this production support, that you have done it, that is obviously going to put you in an extra spot. So HTML, JavaScript, mostly you don't need to know this for your job, for automation, but they're going to ask you questions like, how much do you know? At least if you have a fundamental of this, right, and the backend development knowledge. So if you have a fundamental of this, that is going to put you as a special. Server knowledge, so you don't have to write anything into backend code, although there obviously demand is getting, the bar is getting higher, but at least you should be able to look at the backend, like a server logs, going through some Unix command if you know better, right? Or otherwise learn it. There are some very few basic commands that you need to know. It's just half-an-hour work. Just learn from some Unix commands and find out how you would go through debugging the logs and all that. Next thing is mentoring, coaching, right? Like, how do you work as a team? Have you worked with the different, like, junior members? Have you helped them? What issues they ran into? How were you able to handle that? Like that type of thing. This is again comes in the behavioral knowledge. And beside everything, then the actual work items, they're gonna ask you, oh, what's the hobbies, right? What do you like to do when beside the working hours? It's like when you're done with the work, are you still going to be in the computer? Then it is not a good sign, right? You should be able to enjoy with your family and enjoy your time, go fishing or go, rock climbing or whatever, right? Whatever hobbies would express those items. But you don't have to put this into your resume, though. It's just kind of when you speak them. So I think this video went pretty long, and I expected that because there was so much information, and I'm sure this was pretty fast for you if you're a beginner. So if you have any questions, what do you do? How do you contact me? You write the comments, and I will respond. Right? You write it, I respond it. So any topics you like to discuss about, please write the comment, and I can try to answer those. Most of these items I have already covered in my videos, so go through my channels. There are various videos that addresses each one of these items that's already listed. So I think that is all for me for today. And then finally, if you liked my video, please subscribe to support my channel. And thank you for listening to me. Wish you all the best and wish you luck. Thank you.